Four bright college students, one quiet town, and a killer hiding in plain sight. In November of 2022, the small town of Moscow, Idaho, known more for its wheat fields and university football games than for violence, was shattered by a crime so brutal that it stunned the nation. Four University of Idaho students were murdered in their off-campus home in the early hours of the morning. The killer used a knife, not a gun. He didn't break in loudly or steal anything. He crept through the shadows of the house, stabbing his victims as they slept, before vanishing into the night. What followed was one of the most chilling manhunts in modern American history. Weeks passed without an arrest. Rumors swirled. Fear spread. And the killer could have been anyone. A neighbor, a friend, or even someone sitting next to you quietly in a college lecture. When the arrest finally did come, the name Brian Kohberger stunned the nation. A criminal PhD student studying how criminals think was himself now accused of carrying out one of the most infamous massacres of the 21st century. Tonight, on Twisted Tuesday, we're going to take you through the entire case step by step. From the lives of the victims to the Kohberger's disturbing background, to the night of terror inside the Idaho home, and finally to the shocking courtroom drama that just unfolded this year, in 2025. This is not just a story of murder, it's a story of obsession, of arrogance, of grief, and of justice. And it's one you're never going to forget. Before we talk about Brian Kohberger, before we talk about that night, it's important to know who this story is actually about. Four innocent young people who had their lives stolen far too soon. Kaylee was 21 years old, outgoing, vibrant, with a big smile that made everyone around her feel comfortable. She had just adopted a dog and named him Murphy. She was in the middle of moving into a new apartment. Kaylee was preparing to graduate and had dreams of working in the tech industry. She was incredibly close to her family, especially her parents, and she often spoke about how excited she was for the future and the next chapter of her life. Her bond with Maddie was unshakable. They had been best friends since 6th grade. They weren't just roommates, they were sisters by choice. Madison Mogen was also 21. She was known for her kindness, her warmth, and her loyalty to those she loved. She and Kaylee were inseparable. They had grown up together in northern Idaho, spending summers at the lake, going to dances, and standing by each other through thick and thin. In college, Maddie worked at the Corner Club bar, where she was well liked by customers and co-workers alike. She was studying marketing and looking forward to building a career after graduation. Xana was 20 years old, fun and full of energy. She was always ready with a witty comment. She was juggling her studies with a job at the local restaurant, the Mad Greek, where she worked alongside Maddie. Friends remember her as adventurous and caring, someone who would put others before herself. Xana was dating Ethan Chapin, and the two of them were deeply devoted to each other. Ethan Chapin was also 20. He was a triplet. His brother and sister were his closest friends, and the three of them were inseparable. They also went to the same college, and they described him as being the life of the party, someone who could make the room feel brighter just by being there. Ethan and Xana had been together for about a year, and by all accounts, they were happy, a young couple deeply in love. These four students were not strangers bound by chance. They were part of a tight-knit circle of friends. On the night of November 12th, 2022, they laughed together, ate together, and spent what they didn't know would be the final hours they had alive, in the safety of the house they called home. But within hours, that home would become a crime scene that shocked the world. As we dive deeper into this story, I want you to remember, behind every detail, every piece of evidence, and every courtroom update, there are four young lives, four families that will never be the same. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. They deserve to be remembered. Brian Christopher Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1994, in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. On the surface, his upbringing seemed ordinary. He was the son of Michael and Marianne Kohberger, and he had 2 older sisters. But behind closed doors, Brian's childhood was marked by social awkwardness, deep insecurity, and a growing sense of isolation. As a teenager, Brian struggled with weight and with fitting in. Former classmates described him as quiet and kind of awkward, often the target of teasing. But there was something else, something darker, that only came later to light. Online forums dating back to his teen years, Brian wrote about suffering from visual snow syndrome, a condition where his vision was filled with static-like dots. And he described feeling disconnected from reality, like trapped inside his own mind, and he was unable to connect with the world around him. In one post, he confessed, "I am stuck in a void of nothing. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth." It was a chilling insight into the darkness that lurked behind his eyes. Cry for help, if you ask me. In high school, Brian reportedly lost over 100 pounds. He reinvented himself physically, becoming lean and in some ways more confident. But this transformation seemed to come at a cost. Former friends recalled that Brian grew arrogant, even condescending, as though his new appearance gave him superiority over others. He had once been an outcast. Now he wielded his reinvention like a weapon. He briefly worked as a security guard at a school in Pennsylvania before pursuing higher education. His chosen field was telling, criminal justice and criminology. Brian enrolled at Northampton Community College, where he earned an associate's degree in psychology in 2018. From there, he transferred to DeSales University and completed a bachelor's degree in 2020. Then he continued at DeSales for a master's degree in criminal justice, and he finished in 2022. It was at DeSales that Brian's fascination with crime began to take a disturbing shape. For one of his graduate projects, he posted a survey online asking criminals to describe their thoughts and feelings before, after, and during their crimes. The questions weren't academic in tone. They were chillingly specific. Like how did you plan your crime? What were you thinking and feeling when it happened? And what did you do to prepare for it? These questions were not written like those of a detached researcher. They were written by somebody that sounded like they were trying to crawl inside the mind of a killer. By fall of 2022, Brian had moved across the country to Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, just 15 minutes away from the University of Idaho campus in Moscow. There, he began his PhD in criminology. Classmates and professors noticed his intensity. He was intelligent, articulate, but also kind of social off-putting, kind of awkward, everyone would describe him. Some described him as even creepy, while others said he was just obsessed with the details of past murders and serial killers. There was an irony here that no one could have predicted. Kohberger wasn't just studying criminology, he was living it. In Pullman, Kohberger lived alone in a small apartment. Neighbors described him as strange, often pacing in the yard late at night and taking out the trash at odd hours. Some even noticed him wearing gloves, even in public, even while shopping at grocery stores. Investigators later found that Brian's cell phone had pinged near the victim's off-campus house at least 12 times before the murders. It wasn't just a random killer. He was watching, studying, and stalking them. Brian Kohberger's life paints a paradox. A man obsessed with understanding criminals, a student of justice, someone who should have just been learning how to stop killers, not becoming one. Instead, he did become one. The arrogance that his classmates noticed in him, the superiority, the obsession, would all come to a horrifying climax in November of 2022. Because while 4 students laughed and shared a night together, Kohberger circled their house again and again in his white Hyundai Elantra, preparing to end their lives in the most brutal way imaginable. It was the night of Saturday, November 12th, 2022. The University of Idaho's campus in Moscow was alive with the typical energy of a college town weekend. Football games, late-night parties, food runs, students filling the streets with laughter before heading home. For Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, this was just another weekend night. They had no idea that it would be their last. Kaylee and Maddie started their evening at the Corner Club, a popular Moscow bar. They were chatting with friends, laughing, enjoying what seemed to be like an ordinary Saturday night. Later that night, around 1:30 a.m., surveillance footage captured them at a local food truck. Kaylee wearing a black coat, mini, and a tan hoodie. They smiled, ordered pasta, and stood shoulder to shoulder, just like they always did. At 1:56 a.m., a private party drove them back to their home at 1122 King Road, a 3-story rental house that they shared with their other roommates. Xana and Ethan attended a fraternity party at Sigma Chi, located just a short walk away. The couple left sometime after 1:45 a.m. and returned to the King Road house at the same time that Kaylee and Maddie arrived home. That night, 6 people in total were in the house. Kaylee and Maddie on the 3rd floor, Xana and Ethan on the 2nd floor, and 2 surviving roommates on the ground floor. The survivors would remain untouched, but not unchanged by what was about to happen. While the friends laughed and settled in for the night, another figure moved through the darkness of Moscow. Brian circled the neighborhood not once, not twice, but multiple times. Security footage and doorbell cameras later revealed the car looping around quiet streets, headlights cutting through the early morning darkness. Cell phone records later showed that his phone pinged in the area between 2:47 a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m. He was watching, waiting, and planning. At 4:04 a.m., the white Elantra was captured driving into the neighborhood for one last time. The car passed the house and circled back before pulling onto the street. Then his lights went out. Inside the home, the friends were winding down. Xana had ordered DoorDash, food that would later be found untouched in the kitchen counter. Timestamp 4 o'clock a.m. At 4:12 a.m., a neighbor's security camera picked up faint sounds, a dog barking, voices, and then muffled screams. Investigators believe that Kohberger entered the home through a sliding glass door on the 2nd floor. The layout of the house, the maze of staircases and bedrooms, worked to its advantage. On the 2nd floor, he encountered Xana and Ethan. Ethan was strong and athletic and likely confronted him first. He suffered multiple stab wounds to the torso. Xana was awake and fought for her life. She had over 50 stab wounds. The coroner later revealed that most of these were defensive wounds on her arms that proved that she fought back with everything she had. Kohberger then ascended to the 3rd floor, where Kaylee and Maddie slept side by side in the same bed. Investigators believe Kaylee may have been targeted. She suffered injuries so severe that her father later said she was unrecognizable. Both girls were stabbed repeatedly, their final moments spent together, just as they had lived. It's so horrible. On the ground floor, meanwhile, 2 roommates stayed asleep in their rooms, but one of them, Dylan, woke around 4 o'clock a.m. to what sounded like crying. She opened the door 3 times. The 3rd time, she froze. Standing in the hallway was a masked man, dressed in black, at least 6 feet tall, with bushy eyebrows. He walked past her silently, and as he approached the exit, she heard him whisper to her, "You're gonna be okay. I'm gonna help you." That is so weird. Chilling words that could have meant mockery or reassurance meant for himself. Not sure. But Dylan locked her door, and immediately she was terrified. She remained in her room until hours later. Based on blood patterns and the layout of the house, prosecutors believe Ethan and Xana were attacked first. Police believe that Ethan was stabbed first. His injuries suggested he was standing or moving when attacked, possibly confronting Kohberger in the hallway or the bedroom. Xana was awake. She was likely in the kitchen area or the bedroom when she was attacked. She fought desperately for her life. Like I said, the coroner said she had many defensive wounds. This tells us she was conscious, aware, and struggling. After killing Ethan and Xana, Kohberger ascended to the 3rd floor where Maddie and Kaylee slept. Investigators believe that he sought out Kaylee. Her father said that she had injuries that were significantly more brutal than the others. She suffered deep, disfiguring wounds. At 4:20 a.m., a nearby security camera caught a car speeding away. The white Hyundai Elantra, later tied to Kohberger, vanished into the dark. Forensic later confirmed blood traces matched the victims inside the home, connected to the knife sheath they found next to Maddie's bed. Proof that Kohberger had carried out all 4 killings in less than 15 minutes. By the time the sun rose over Moscow, Idaho, 4 young lives were gone, and a killer was already miles away. The house fell silent, a tomb for the victims, until police arrived the following morning. This was no random act. It was methodical, brutal, and deeply personal. And yet for weeks there would be no answers. None. Because Brian Kohberger thought he planned the perfect crime. The morning of Sunday, November 13th, 2022, began quietly in Moscow, Idaho. The town was still covered in frost, but inside the King Roadhouse, time stood frozen in horror. It wasn't until around noon that 911 call was placed from the surviving roommates' phones. The call has remained mysterious. Officials have never released the full details of the 911 call, but it referenced an unconscious person. What first responders found when they arrived, though, was far worse. When police entered the home, even seasoned officers were shaken. This wasn't just a single stabbing or a fight gone wrong. It was a bloodbath. 4 young students slaughtered in their bedrooms. One officer later admitted that the scene was the most disturbing he had ever encountered. Blood seeped through the walls and pooled on floors. This crime was so violent that Kaylee's father would later say that his daughter's injuries made her look mutilated. Later released body cam footage shows police moving cautiously through the house with their flashlights shining to the dark rooms that had only hours before been filled with laughter and happiness. On that footage, a surviving roommate can be heard sobbing, overwhelmed by the horror she had just went through. Their surviving students were quickly escorted out, trembling and confused, while the street outside was filled with flashing lights, yellow tape, and stunned neighbors watching in disbelief. Word spread quickly across campus. 4 students gone all at once in the dead of the night. The news shattered the fragile sense of safety in this small college town. Students began packing their bags, fleeing home before Thanksgiving break. Parents flooded their children's phones with texts like, "Are you safe? Are you okay? Please lock your doors." No one knew who had done this or why. And worse, no one knew if the killer was still out there. From the beginning, this case has baffled investigators. No signs of forced entry, no theft, no obvious motive. For weeks, the public felt law enforcement was fumbling in the dark. But behind the scenes, detectives were meticulously piecing together a puzzle. Near Maddie's body on the 3rd floor, crime scene techs discovered something critical. That was the tan knife sheath, stamped with a U.S. Marine Corps insignia. Inside the sheath, they recovered some DNA, but it didn't match anyone in CODIS, which is the National Criminal Database. But it was their first real lead, and the only thing they had to go on. Meanwhile, investigators combed through hours and hours of surveillance footage from Moscow and Pullman. Again and again, the King Road, they seen the white Honda Elantra. It circled King Road House multiple times on the night of the murders and then sped away at 4:20 a.m. Detectives traced registrations and eventually narrowed the search to Washington State University, where the graduate student, Brian Kohberger, owned a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. Even more damning was Kohberger's cell phone records revealed that his phone had pinged at least 12 times before the murders near the home. He had been surveilling them, scoping him out, perhaps choosing the right moment to attack. On the night of the murders, his phone mysteriously went dark between 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m., precisely when the killings took place. When it powered back on, it was miles away. To track the DNA, investigators turned to one of the most powerful new tools in forensics, genetic genealogy. By building a family tree from partial matches, they zeroed in on the Kohberger family in Pennsylvania. The FBI began covert surveillance of Brian in Pennsylvania over Christmas break while he was visiting his parents. In late December, agents collected trash from his parents' house. Testing revealed a DNA sample from the trash matched his father to a 99.9998% match to the DNA on the knife sheath. It was enough. Police finally had their suspect. In the early morning hours of December 30th, 2022, a tactical team surrounded the Kohberger family's home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Inside, Brian slept in his childhood bedroom. But at 1:30 a.m., when the officers smashed through the door and took him into custody, he was arrested without incident. Though reports later claimed that he did ask officers, "Did you arrest anyone else?" Which I still don't understand why he would say that. The FBI has tracked his move all across the country. They knew he had driven over 2,000 miles in his Elantra from Washington to Pennsylvania with his father after the semester ended. Along the way, he was stopped twice in Indiana for minor traffic violations, one for tailgating and one for speeding. Dashcam footage just shows him pale, restless, and sitting beside his father. He was probably pretty worried, thinking he was getting pulled over for the crime. In Pennsylvania, agents recovered more evidence: surgical gloves, trash bags, and items that he had carefully discarded. He was extradited back to Idaho in early January 2023, facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. When he appeared in court in Moscow, shackled, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, the families of the victims stared at him with rage and with grief. I can only imagine. He showed no emotion, though. Sounds like a psychopath to me. Complete psychopath. From the start, Kohberger's legal team worked to challenge the narrative and the evidence. His lead attorney, Ann Taylor, she filed multiple motions questioning the reliability of the cell phone tower data, the collection methods of the DNA, and whether the police mishandled any key evidence. Kohberger himself sat through hearings with just a blank stare, showing no emotion, occasionally whispering to his attorneys, rarely acknowledging that he had a packed courtroom behind him. A gag order was also imposed, frustrating families and the media. But fragments did leak out: surveillance footage, the chilling words of the surviving roommate, and whispers of a trial that could take years. The defense hinted at holes in the state's case, but the weight of the evidence, the DNA, the cell phone pings, the car, the knife sheath, painted a damning picture. The prosecution's case against Brian Kohberger wasn't built on just one piece of evidence, though. It was an overwhelming combination of science, surveillance, and his own strange behaviors that told the story. The most damning item was the tan kabar sheath found on Mighty's bed. On the button snap of the sheath, investigators pulled a single male DNA profile. Genetic genealogy pointed to the Kohberger's family, and a later direct swab confirmed it to be Brian Kohberger's DNA. This one item tied him directly to the crimes and put him in the house and in the bedroom. Data showed Kohberger's phone pinging near the victim's house 12 times before the murders. Most of the pings were late at night or early in the morning, suggesting he was watching the house. And on the night of the murders, his phone mysteriously had went dark, like I said, between 2:47 and 4:48 a.m., the precise window when the killings occurred. When it powered back on, it was on a rural highway, far from the crime scene. Later surveillance showed Brian cleaning out his car obsessively in the days after the murders, even vacuuming it out in the middle of the night. Neighbors said he wore gloves constantly, even when he was shopping for groceries, but he had different gloves on this time, and he wore them when he was trying to scrub his car clean. After the murders, he returned to the crime scene area at least one more time. His phone pinged there, as if he couldn't resist revisiting what he had done. Ugh, so sickening. He drove across country with his father in that December, disposing of trash and cleaning out his car along the way. When FBI agents raided the parents' home, they found him at 1:30 a.m. wearing latex gloves, placing his personal trash in separate bags inside family trash bins. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. Brian Kohberger was not only obsessed, he was reckless. He thought he could outsmart investigators. Instead, he left a trail straight to his front door. For weeks, for the families of the victims, they waited It was agony. Weeks turned into months, and with every hearing, the weight of the grief grew heavier. Kaylee's father, Steve, became an advocate for his daughter. He spoke openly about his frustrations with the investigation, demanding transparency. He described the brutality of Kaylee's injuries, saying his daughter had been targeted. His raw honesty resonated with the public, but it also exposed the deep pain that the families carried. For Ethan's family, the grief was doubled by his role as a triplet. His brother and sister, also students at the University of Idaho, suddenly found themselves navigating campus life without him. His mother, Stacy, often spoke about how empty their lives felt without Ethan's laughter. Maddie and Xana's families expressed heartbreak at the loss of their daughters, both so young, both so full of promise. Xana's relatives highlighted her courage and how she fought to the very end. Maddie's parents spoke of her deep friendship with Kaylee, saying they died as they lived, side by side. Moscow, Idaho was changed forever. For months, students carried pepper spray, locked themselves in their dorms, and avoided walking alone at night. National media descended on the town, covering every development. Internet sleuths flooded TikTok and Reddit with theories, some helpful but mostly harmful, spreading rumors about professors, boyfriends, and strangers. Didn't make the police's job any easier. The families bore the weight of not only their grief, but also the endless speculation. After more than 2 years of delays, 2 years, hearings and legal motions, the case came to its climax in July of 2025 this year. July 2nd, 2025, Brian Kohberger stood in court and pled guilty to 4 counts of murder, first-degree murder, and 1 count of burglary. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to push the death penalty. It was a stunning turn. For years, his defense hidden at a trial. In the end, he admitted to the killings. On July 23, 2025, Judge Stephen Hippler sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each murder, and 10 extra years for the burglary, and more than $270,000 in fines and restitution. I don't know how he's going to pay that. But in court, family members of the victims gave heart-wrenching statements. Some demanded to know why. Others begged him just to look at them, to acknowledge them, and acknowledge what he had done. But Kohberger remained expressionless, staring forward, offering no apology. When the judge also said that he would really like to know why these crimes were committed, if he would like to give a statement, Kohberger just stared blankly and said, "I respectfully decline." The sentencing was accompanied by the release of new chilling details. Xana had over 50 stab wounds. Kaylee was described as unrecognizable. Body cam evidence revealing the surviving roommate's encounter, her hearing the Kohberger whisper, "You're gonna be okay, I'm gonna help you." That's the weird part, really weird part. Now housed at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, Kohberger has already filed multiple harassment complaints. It's good. Other inmates reportedly taunt him daily, making threats. He obsessively washes his hands and has begged to be transferred, claiming that his life is unsafe. In a bizarre twist, convicted serial killer Happy Face, Keith Jesperson, has offered support, calling Kohberger his best hope for a cellmate. That's creepy. Even after all this, though, no clear motive has ever been confirmed. Investigators revealed his phone had pinged near the house repeatedly before the murder, suggesting that he stalked them. But why? Why these victims? Why this house? We may never truly know. In the end, this case is not about Brian Kohberger. It's about 4 young lives. Kaylee, who dreamed of a bright future in tech. Madison, her best friend and sister in spirit. Xana, courageous and full of life. And Ethan, a brother, a son, and a friend who lit up every room. They should be alive today. Instead, their families are left with memories, and a town is left scarred forever. So as we close tonight's Twisted Tuesday, let us remember them not only for the way they died, but for the way they lived. And while Brian Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in behind bars, the horror he unleashed in November of 2022 will echo for generations. Thank you for joining me for this week's Twisted Tuesday's True Crime Story. We will always remember Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. May they rest in peace together. Until next Tuesday, guys, be safe, take care of each other, always, and always trust your gut. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye!